this stuff. Yeah, this thing was supposed to be a one-on-one talk over a cheap bottle of wine or something. Isn't that how this first got started? I don't give lectures. I don't give PowerPoint displays. I don't know much about computers. Okay. I don't want everybody to head for the exits at once, but I am not an archaeologist. I spend a lot of time in archaeological sites. I was on another one just this week. We've been doing it for 27 years. Started out with Dr. Phelps on Rocky Rollinson Road. I was one of the first guys for the Croatoan project. Done a lot of underwater stuff with Surface Interval Dive Company. Hired Dr. Phelps to do some other Civil War stuff for me. But in the last few years, now that I'm getting a little bit older than years, my time in the field is less and less. And I've been trying to pull together the things that I have learned in 50-some years of research. From the time I was a little kid listening to my great-grandmother. A Retta midget probably gave me more information about this island the way it was in the past than any one person. So I'm not a writer. I've co-authored a couple of books. I've written a couple myself. I have no pretenses about being a writer. I'm an author. I only write about things that I discover. So I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not a historian. People make that mistake all the time. David Stick, one of my best friends, even he did. And David didn't make many mistakes. But he endorsed one of the books that he wrote for me when he signed it over to me and accused me of being one of him. I told him it was a backhanded compliment, but I take it anyway. What I do, I'm a construction worker. I've been a partner in a construction business now for, well, we're the oldest construction company on this island. My father started the business in 1971 when he got out of the military. And we started putting in pilings, and that wasn't something I wanted to do. The first piling we put in, I fell in the hole and I'm bobbing around in a great big old hole and I'm up to my neck here. I wasn't getting any help getting out of that hole. They were too busy laughing at me. I got out, finished the job, and never got away from it. I have a degree in marine sciences, marine biology. Okay. Biology has just a little bit to do with this. It's something that they need to look into a little bit more. I didn't take any archaeology. I didn't take any history while I was in school. I started as an engineer and went into the life sciences rather quickly. And so I wound up with a very strong concentration of physics, chemistry, and geology to go with my biology. They told me that when I left there that I had more what they called quality points. They take the number of hours that you get for each course, like you have a 3 or 4 hour course, and then they multiply it by your grade point average for that course, 1 through 4. I guess now they're doing 5s. I don't know what that's all about. But anyway, when I was a student, 4 was the best you could get. So I left Wilmington. Well, I'm going to back up just a little bit. I started at State, and I went there for my first 2 years. And 3 weeks before I was to go back for my junior year, on Friday the 13th, August 1976, I broke my neck. So I didn't get to go back to school right away. I laid out of school for 2.5 years, got married in the interim, and then I went down to Wilmington and finished up my education down there. While I was a student, I would do anywhere from 18 to 20-some semester hours, which is like way above board. They said 12 was full-time. I think you need to do 16 or 17 to graduate. I'm way above that because I'm taking a lot of extra courses. And on top of that, I have 2 independent research projects that I'm working on. One of those has nothing to do with anything to do here. It has to do with the riddle of the sea. We'll talk about that now. That's out in the deep ocean. But the other was about ecological succession of this barrier island, something that's always fascinated me from the time I was a little kid. So I learned an awful lot in those 2 years. Had a federal permit to work out in an area called Creeds Hill. Up until a little bit ago, nobody knew about the origins of Creeds Hill. Now that I've been working with grants and deeds, kind of got that figured out. each thing that I got into led me to something else, which led me to something else, which led me to something else. I started out with a USS Monitor grave when I was still in high school. Have not finished that. That will be the last thing that I do. But in between, we did the Civil War Trail. We've got markers from Ocracoke to Mans Harbor, 75 miles worth of trails. I spent a lot of time working with the History Center. I sat on their board for 6 years. Chaired it the last 2 when we were doing the 100th celebration of flight, and quite a few other things. It was all worthwhile. Got to meet a lot of new people who could advance the things that I was interested in doing. I don't think you're going to find anybody quite like me. I was raised here off and on. I was a Navy brat. I wanted to spend every weekend, every day down here I could with my great-grandmother. Okay, this was home. I didn't get to stay down here full-time until 1971 when Dad got out of the Navy. He was a nuclear submariner. Mom was from the island, midget. If you're a midget up from Chickamaucomico, you got O'Neill in you. Of course, Meekins, Farrow. And then I found out Jeanette's and Flowers, and oh God, the list went on and on and on. I don't do genealogy, okay? I'm not going to get into arguments about genealogy. In fact, the project that I'm working on, I cut it off at 1870. Okay, I'm going to bring things forward to 1870, and I'm going to leave it to everybody in this room and beyond to fill in all the blanks, to take your histories back, to tie into what it is I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is, I wanted to know who got here and when, and the record is very sketchy, very sketchy. Lawson is given credit as being the first European to set foot on these soils since the Lost Colony. And to me, that's just utter nonsense. There's a lot of history has already happened in eastern North Carolina, and here we are out in the ocean. People go and buy us almost on a daily basis, and nobody stops to say hello. Nobody has to stop and get resources off the island or whatever. More importantly, nobody can get through those inlets there without somebody showing them the way. And from my perspective, and everything I'm telling you now is my perspective. I'm not telling you this is the way it was. This is my understanding of things, pure and simple. If it doesn't hold water, so be it. But I've been formulating this stuff for a long, long time, okay? And most of it is just common sense. Lawson comes here in 1701. He sees gray-eyed Indians, which we interpret as being blue eyes. He saw auburn hair. My ex-wife had auburn hair. I knew she had Indian blood in her line. Maybe that was one of the reasons I married her. I don't know. I found out later that I had it in me too. The genealogist supplied that to me. They knew my grandparents. If I've got my grandparents, both of my grandparents' genealogies off this island, I pretty much got mine. It's pretty easy to fill in the last 2 blanks. So I'm none of these things that most people would have to do this. I never planned on giving this little talk. I never did, but I'm comfortable with talking to groups of people. I had to do it a lot at the History Center. We'd have 300-400 people sometimes, and it was up to me to get up and try to talk, but never for 2 hours, and I'm not going to do it today. I'm going to quickly turn this into a roundtable discussion because these are learning experience for me as well as hopefully you're going to learn something too. I've met a lot of geologists, I've met a lot of archaeologists, and quite a few historians too. Historians are another breed, okay? Most of them I like. Some of them I don't know where they're coming from. The archaeologist, I have a lot of respect for, all except for one that I had to work for. And we won't mention him, but he's in the title of one of my books, okay? The archaeologist, they seem to want to think outside the envelope, and they're not as driven to discover something that they have already preordained, and I like that. I don't go into a problem trying to figure out, okay, how do I get to the answer that I already know? That's not the way it works. You follow the evidence, and the evidence takes you where it leads you to. And I'm sorry if that upsets people. Some people have a preconceived idea of what this place is all about. And this is where I want to throw open the forum right now. Does anybody in here want to share with the group what you feel this island was like before the white man got here? Anybody have a concept? There's a lot of debate about it, and there's reason for that. This place has seen a lot of change. Please.
Mosquitoes.
No doubt. No doubt.
I guarantee you there were mosquitoes.
Yes, there were. And that's historically documented. There's no getting around that. And as a biologist, I can assure you they've been here as part of the ecosystem since time began. How about the lay of the land, the size of the island? What did you see when you got here? Anybody have a conjecture about that? Okay.
Scrub brush.
No trees.
No trees. Okay, that's one opinion.
I would have said that there were trees, cedar,
Yes.
lots of cedar trees
Yes,
is
I
what,
would.
cedar forest is what I would have thought. Just judging from.
Okay.
Marsh.
Just
A lot of
judging from
marsh.
In
Shackford Bay.
Buxton.
In Buxton?
In Buxton, the trees would be in Buxton.
Okay.
If there was a huge boat building trade in Avon, then there must have been a lot of trees here.
Correct.
Yeah, later on.
Yes, there were.
But those trees take a long time. They grow hundreds.
And- And
we
the
don't-
cedars are a key to that. Cedars are an adventitious species. They move into a void, okay? I know you all, or most of you have been here long enough to see what's happened, say, Salvo Deus area, okay? When you drive by there, now you see those great big tall cedars. They're not monstrous, but you know, they're getting some height to them. When I was a little boy, I could have jumped over every one out there. I could
Right.
surely see from the sound to the ocean. When I was a boy, I'm going to take y'all back when I was 3 years old, okay? Because these are about when my first memories are happening here. So you're looking at 1959, and I know that to be because my brother wasn't born yet, and I have a whole host of memories that predate Rob. We had 20-some acres of land in Rodanthe, from the Sound all the way to the ocean. Park Service took that 500 foot off back in the early 50s. That was before me. But almost in my backyard, the next property over to the north, there was a shipwreck right there on the beach. And you couldn't keep me away from that thing for anything in the world. I got my butt spanked so many times. My family did not believe in sparing the rod, let me tell you. But it did not deter me. Some of the first books that I remember reading were Robinson Crusoe, Treasure Island, and here I got this shipwreck. Now it's just an LST, it's a metal hulk, there's not much to it. But to a little 3-year-old, it's mighty awesome. Now at that time, I could look all the way across the island, and more importantly, my great-grandmother could look all the way across the island. She always knew where I was headed. When I had permission, I could visit any house up and down the ridge. Well, I say up the ridge because we were the last one to the south. She'd pick up the party line telephone, say, Milk is coming for milk and cookies, needs a cup of sugar, whatever. And I'd go trotting up the ridge, get whatever it was I was supposed to be doing, and come on back. But when I could slip off, every time, I'm to that shipwreck. She's a 1/4 mile away from me, okay? And there's 2 sets of dunes. Not one or none, as there is in a lot of places now, right, Tom? There's 2 sets of dunes. And when she said Melvin and accented that second syllable, I knew I better beat feet across that dune and get home because I was already going to get a whooping. Thank God the willow tree wasn't growing there like it was at grandmother's, because there she'd make me go cut my own switch and bring it to her, and then I would get my whooping. But none of that stuff deterred me. It got in my blood early, and that's what I blame it on, is that stupid shipwreck. From that, I found out there were 5 more wrecks right in that general vicinity as a scuba diver and working on Rodanthe Pier. So shipwrecks have always fascinated me. That's why I spent so much time with the Surface Interval Dive Company down in Ocracoke, working over a 3-masted schooner down there. And each of these exercises, I would always stumble upon something that was germane to something going on in my past. So I have like 10 projects going at one time. And I say one time, some of them are just sitting there on the back burner. But as I come to information, I will pick it up and I push that to the next yard line, so forth and so on. And every once in a while, I get to wrap one of them up. Done 2 of them in the last 3 years. The thing about Chickamaucomico with the Civil War fort up there. More importantly, maybe you all knew that Indian Town proper, Croatoan's Indian Town, has now been located. We know exactly where it was, okay? Everybody knows about the story of the CRO and the Croatoan carved into the trees. A lot of people suspected it was Cape Creek. don't you go ahead and start flashing through some of the stuff right now. Put up the first one. That's the second one. That's that. I think it's the third one. Yeah, back the arrow's on this side. It's hiding in there somewhere. We lost our arrow.
Keyboard.
Where is it?
Huh?
Try the arrow on the keyboard, maybe.
See an arrow on the
There's
keyboard?
arrow to the left.
See, what we've done, we tried to
There's
throw
more
together
there.
a presentation in the last 2 days, basically. I've never done this before, never get a PowerPoint this,
Page up, page down.
while they're looking for it, I'll keep talking. Croatoan. A long time ago, when I was working with Dr. Phelps, this was in the 90s, I spent quite a few hours out there with him. Can't find it?
Just gonna go down like that,
Okay, yeah, the other way.
otherwise.
Other way, yeah, you're going forward. Let's go back. Go on back. Go on back. Come on
Stops
back.
at that.
There is no back.
I think that was the first slide on that.
No. First one, go back to the task view. You'll
It's
find
not,
it.
it's not going above that.
Okay, well,
And I'm not computer,
you're like me.
pretty much.
Yeah,
You
that's
put me
all.
over here, so I,
That's the top.
We're going forward. There you go.
Okay, so this is according to this.
That's where she
I don't know,
started
something
at.
happened, yeah, so.
Well, we've missed the first 2 exhibits, is what we've done.
Go into your file.
I need.
You need somebody to help you with this.
Bobby, I'm computer literate.
This is why I don't do these things. I don't know a whole lot about computers. Y'all might have known Mr. Earl O'Neill from Ocracoke, who wrote, 20-some books? Anytime I had a problem doing this stuff, I'd take it to Mr. Earl, and he'd get me fixed up in no time. And then he died. So I had to start learning a few things myself. But boy, has this been an adventure.
Yes, probably number
Is it
2, second
that
one.
one?
That's it. Pop that one up right there, Exhibit 1. Then it comes to,
It
This
comes
says
to that.
it is.
that's not it.
Try hit file again.
That
What's that second number 2? Is that presentation exhibits?
Excuse me just a second.
one, not yet.
What Exhibit 1 is just to let y'all know that I do know a little bit about what I'm trying to talk about here. And we're going to pass this around. What this is, these are all the significant land transactions that have to do with Indiantown, just right down the road. Can you imagine all of this stuff is in the deeds? Okay. I told the archaeologist that I was pretty sure that there were information within the written record of titles, deeds, grants, wills, and everybody said that's too much work. And they're right, it is, it's just too much work. I had to come up with some methodology to whittle through this stuff and try to narrow it down. And it took a couple of years basically to try to figure out how do you handle information that would just literally fill up this room and you still be able to make sense of it, okay? Just think if you could pick up a book like we have to do when we research this stuff, and you could eliminate everything that didn't have anything to do with Hatteras Island or Roanoke Island or Ocracoke. Just get rid of that 85%, okay? And then think about what you could do if you could apply that in context, the context of time, what is happening around the world that's germane to the situation here. But also, who got here when? And here's what I found out. By the year 1635, this is only 28 years after Jamestown has been settled, and Jamestown goes off to a rocky start, okay? Most of these families are already over here. They're up in Chesapeake, okay? They're around the Chesapeake Bay area, 1635. Well, Lost Colony didn't happen until the 1580s. So there's a huge disconnect in time. So what was everybody doing between those times? When did these people get here? Lawson was not the first. He could not have been. If you think back to that story of Lawson seeing the gray-eyed Indians with the auburn hair, who could speak English and read English and had English mannerisms, but some of them were wearing English attire or things that resembled English attire. Now, how can someone who has no contact with the outside world be wearing clothes that are English and not native? These aren't hand-me-downs from 1580s to 1701. I don't think any of those are left to be shared. They're getting close. There's connection there. And what I have tried to do is just trace it back through names, grants, deeds, wills, and then beyond that, what you all are here for is to step beyond. I have geographical points of reference. See, the crazy thing about these grants and these deeds, when you pull up the oldest one that you can find, usually it's referenced in some place that already has a name. Okay, the oldest grant that I found on this island is William Reed's in 1712. And he's between the Indian towns, according to the grant. He had a bunch of properties. He was like a colonel. So he has more property than the average Joe. Two other grants that he had on the same island here, one down in Hatteras, mentions Durant's Point. Durant's already here by 1712. Over here to Cape Creek, he has another section of land, hundreds of acres, and it mentions a Lambert's Marsh. Okay? Now, when I look through all of these deeds and grants, I keep coming across names that... That one right there, what's that bring up?
I think that's where we were.
Lawson should be at 1701. What do you have there? I skipped that one. Go to the second one. Maybe it got inserted somewhere, it's just not picking up. See what the number 2 one's doing. Can you go back to where you were?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, hit debris.
That?
Number 2, that one right there. Let's see what comes up there. Okay. Now, I apologize for the words being sideways. And we can turn it around, but I really would rather stay oriented with a compass, because back in the day, everything was oriented, orient being the east, okay? And that's the way they drew the first maps. You see Hatteras is way up here on the north end. This is Roanoke Island, okay? Hatteras is this section up here, and I was taught, my understanding again, is that it means land of sparse vegetation, which goes back into what you were saying. Marsh, not many trees, bushes. I'm not even going to try to pronounce these. I murdered most of the translations that I come up with. Again, I'm not a historian. I just use these things as reference to find things. But down here on the lower end, this is where, well, we're about up here. Here's Cape Point, and this is Chacandepico Inlet. What we know is just north of the village where it used to keep breaking through. 73 storm, Ash Wednesday storm, 62. It's all the same place. That used to be an inlet. Okay? These are palisades, but they're not on the original map, so I can't really say that they represent the villages where they truly are. I'm interpreting this to be Buxton Landing. This would be about the school, and this would be Frisco, Indiantown, Brigands Bay, Brooks Point, Kings Point. This inlet is very important. When you keep track of the time for me, because I don't want to go on too long before we break. When we started first doing the archaeological survey out to Cape Creek, the first thing I noticed was 95% of the midden was scallop shells. Okay? Down the road 4 miles at the midden that I tried desperately to get them to go search for years and years and years, and they finally did at the last, is the largest oyster shell midden that anybody knows of. It's 4 acres in size. So I got 2 sites that are like 4 miles apart. Scallops over here, oysters over there. And when the natives had these shellfish in their canoe and they're rowing back to shore, I'm just assuming that they didn't go eat their oysters at Kings Point and then take their scallops down to Cape Creek and have theirs. They had what they had where they found them. And those of you from around the island know that we find scallops around the inlets. And this is very important. And that inlet supposedly closed up in 1674. You take away that inlet, you don't have bay scallops anymore. And that's important. Lawson got here in 1701. Lawson went to Indiantown. Most people were considering that he must have went to Cape Creek. But Lawson was also a cartographer. Now you can go to that one that we were stuck on. Okay. Notice how thick the island is right here at the North Point. This is 1701. Now I actually have the survey, a surveyor's plat of the stretch of beach that was done in 1759. And it shows the waterways where the inlet used to be, down from Cape Creek all the way up to Deep Creek, which is about the haul over. Lawson never went to the north end of Cape Creek. If he had of, he would have drawn that accurately, okay? This map also told me that Lawson could not have been the first white man to get here since the Lost Colony because of this over here. Now, he didn't know what Chickamaucomico was, all right? That's the early spelling of it, pure and simple. If you want to try to pronounce it, go ahead. But if you go back to the map, the first map that we were looking at, we have another point up here, okay? And this threw map makers for a long time. Didn't throw me. I knew all along what they were talking about because I happened to be from Rodanthe. You wouldn't believe how much land I've seen washed away in Rodanthe in 50-some years of observation. That 500 feet that the Park Service took from my family, that's gone. Granddaddy, he had a line of oceanfront lots across the end of his property. That's 130-some feet long. Had condos on them. That's all gone. Had a road that separated that from the rest of the development. That was another 30-some feet. That's gone. Lots on the other side of the road coming back. 1, 2, 3. I think we're on the 4th one now. You're looking at 1,000 foot of land that has disappeared in 50-some years. Okay? 50-some years. And you take that back 400 years. Extrapolate that. And what you have but the 4th point. And this 4th point is almost in the same latitude, the Stumpy Point, Longshoal Point. That's where the 4th point is and why he drew for it. Now there is a magnetic anomaly out here. If you look on the navigational charts, you'll see it. It deviates the compass about 8 degrees. So that may have accentuated it a little bit, but make no mistake, that point was out there then. Okay? It's just not there now except for Wimble Shoals. That's all we have left of it. And of course, Rodanthe's still washing away desperately. Okay, so I've touched on Chacandepico, the relationship between that and the village.
Where would Rodanthe be in relation to this?
Right here is just across from the
Yeah.
Long Shoal and Stumpy
Okay.
Point. Okay, we're right out there in the peak of it. When I was a little boy on the beach, and then later when I was working rebuilding Rodanthe Pier, you could easily stand there and look up the beach and down the beach, and you noticed how it was like this. It was out there on the point. That point started out north of the pier when I was a little boy in the area that LST might have had something to do with the LST, probably did. But now that point has progressed. It's down to about where the old KOA campground is. It's slowly moving that way as it's retreating back this way. Same story is going over on the sound side. Can we get to our menu again? Oh, one thing. Chickamaucomico. The word gets here before Lawson does. Lawson's here in 1701. Chickamaucomico already has a name. Okay.
So Lawson lands and says, what do you call this place?
Somebody told him what it was. He didn't pull it out of thin air.
Yeah, right.
You know, somebody had to communicate that to him. And this is, what, Mosley's map? Used to be what, the 1730s?
1733.
Okay. And we've got Neal. This is plantation. Actually, this plantation was down here. Mapmaker's off. Mosley never set foot on the ground. Lawson did. Boots on the ground trumps all, by the way. Lawson just didn't go up here. And this is Gibbs. A later map shows Scarborough up here, and that's accurate. Neal is Christopher Neal, the father of Christopher O'Neill. Okay, that's the way it worked. And I'd heard rumors that, that's the way naming worked. Well, I got it in the deeds. He says that's my father, and that's good enough for me. He's got a piece of land right next to his father's land. His father's Christopher Neal, the surveyor, and he's Christopher O'Neill. 4 minutes? Okay. To the next one, please. Now we're in 1872. This was a map that was started right before the Civil War in 1860. So war breaks out, they don't get to finish it. The reason that this is important is this is an open waterway where this says pond. On the rest of the map, if you follow it all the way back, it communicates with Jeanette Sedge up to Cape Creek. So what you have is an inland waterway. It goes through here, you can't really see it, but it goes through here. Today, this is called Indiantown Pond. Continued on here and then hooked and went out into the Sound. This is a ridge that communicates with Indiantown. Indiantown Ridge is right here. I know most of you have been back there one time or another. It's all high ground along the Sound side. When you get up in that elevated area and you follow it all the way to the end, then it drops down all of a sudden and hooks to the right. There's the end of the ridge, there's that. Okay? Today, the creek is way down here, and that threw people off. Thomas King Creek was relocated. Look out here. I have the first deeds that I can find that mentioned Kings Point. At that time, Kings Point is still tied in to the rest of the point here. This section is mentioned as being the narrow section of the point. Well, it's gone now. This island that I remember, what we called Clark's Island when I was still in high school. There was still some of it there. It's all gone now. As is most of this point here. You're really back to about here. All right? This is 1872. Take that all the way back to the 1580s when White was here. He did some watercolors. Now, this is not his original. This is the third generation. And it wasn't done until 1700s. And each time, well, you started out with a drawing, then you had a watercolor, then there was some engraved plates. And then about 100 years later, this Frenchman, Charlatan, I believe was his name, it's in here. He does his own version. Each time they get a little more liberal with the amount of Indians, the amount of fishing weirs, the amount of hills, trees, birds in the air. It all started from John White's sketch. But the important thing was, I looked at that sketch many, many times, and what you don't see in there is in the sketch, he's standing on land when he is looking back. And he sees high ground over here and low ground over there. It fits in perfectly. John White, we know, went to Croatoan and spoke with the Indians. And I'm pretty sure that the Indian village is right here. He was on that point when he drew that sketch. It's the only place I can find in all the shorelines in Dare County and up around Roanoke beyond that would give you that kind of vantage point. Yeah? Take a few minutes here, okay? In the world, which is the islands are moving westward to the mainland. Okay? I know you all heard that. Mm-hmm. Yeah?
Yes.
Balderbash. Horse feathers. Can I say any stronger words in a church?
No.
There's no truth to it whatsoever. None whatsoever. And what those guys didn't have was the benefit of my experience. I don't even have an undergraduate degree. I'm still an undergraduate in there. The gentleman came at me rather hard, and I knew what he wanted me to do. He wanted me to kowtow down and say something that I did not believe was true, although he did, all for the grade. Okay? I beat his attack back 3 times, and he came back at me the 4th time. And finally I looked at him and called him by name. I said, I know who you are, I know what you want me to say, and I'm not going to say it. But I am going to say that I live on the largest barrier island in the world. It's 52 miles long along that shoreline. And if you can show me any one spot on Hatteras Island that's moving westward, y'all can flunk me down. If not, get the off my back. That's not something that a student is supposed to do to academia, but I was very upset And he was upset with me too. And my advisor wasn't too happy either. He immediately stood up and said, "That's all, Mel." And I thought, well, there's 2 years worth of research down the chute. I was excused from the room, and I went outside and sat there. It looked like a church pew that they had there, a little bench for us to sit on. And they hashed that out for a good 20, 25 minutes or longer. Couldn't make out a word they were saying, but the voices were loud. Door opened, and that geologist was the first one to come barreling out of that room, and he stormed right past me, and he would look at me and go, "Oh," he just went out the door. The 8th one out of the room was Dr. Paul Hosier, my advisor, a man who I admire greatly. He walked up to me and slapped me on the back and says, "Mel, you got your day." Now, that challenge was issued in 1980, December of 1980. It was one of the last things I did before I graduated. I graduated in the off season because that broken neck threw me out of whack. All right, the challenge still stands, and every time I see the geologist, I bring this thing up. The islands are not moving westward. Just as last week, I saw a Park Service exhibit on one of the parking turnouts saying the same thing. But here's what they didn't know. Okay? They don't dig holes like I dig holes. I put in pilings. I started digging holes when I was 3 years old, because back then we didn't have garbage men to come pick up our cans and our bottles. We burned the other stuff, and the rest of it went in the ground. And at 3 years old, they handed me a little shovel and said, "You go out and dig holes."
That's right.
Okay? And he buried his cans. The whole south end of Mama's house, that was built in the 20s, it's just a minefield out there. Okay? I was running into them all the time. I mean, just dig another hole over here, fill it up, fill it all in. It didn't take me too long to realize when I would do those holes. Okay, let's go. And I'm not an artist. I suffer from boxer's fracture, so please bear with me. I got a hole in the ground. Okay. I am noticing strata. And this is a crude approximation because there are many, many different layers down there. Okay. Some of them are just sand. Okay? And others are shell bits, and I'm not going to draw shells because I'm not too good at this. But you have different layers here, and then you'll have a thin layer here, so forth. You get the idea. It's a 12-layer cake. Okay? And some of these things are put there by water, and some are put by wind. And you can easily tell them apart. Wind brings in sand. Okay? So we'll get sand. We'll get sharp sand. It glistens. I mean, you can see the edges on it. It screeches when you put a shovel. But you put it across it, you hear the noise it makes. Some of them are like little glass beads. They've been tumbled. They've traveled a long ways, and all the rough edges have been knocked off. There'll be layers of magnetite in there, which are dark. And you wonder where that comes from. Well, they've been sorted out through the water and also from the cosmic. When the meteorites burn up in the sky, that dust comes down. It lands out there, water collects it, it travels with it, and it gets sorted out because it has a different density. Some of them are black, some of them you've seen the deep red ones, like vermouth color, not vermouth, but burgundy. Okay? That's garnet, crushed up garnet. And then down here, well, we're going to say the water table is right here for now. That's as far as I knew how to go, because every time I dig further, the hole would collapse. All right? But when I had to start putting in pilings, that's a different thing. All right? So I'm putting in pilings in all different places. Do we have, well, wipe this off for me here, will you?
Sure, Mel.
You're supposed to help me out here.
He's not calling me down.
It don't work as good as they thought it did, now, does it?
No,
We'll try a
it's
different color.
John's.
Let's try a different color. I'm gonna give you all a crude sketch of Red Anthony, where I grew up. There's that point. We got a fishing pier out here.
That's, I live just under the,
property runs, well, let's see, up here we got the creek. And then it comes down, shoreline, goes all the way down where the old KOA used to be, and then we got the drain. And the drain would run all the way up here. This is all sand and stuff that communicates together. All right. Today we call this North Drain. In the early 1700s, it was called the sand drain. All of this sand is coming here, goes down there, and it's still clogging it up today. When you go north, take a look and you'll see a big old pile of sand in there. It's always choked up with it. The sand drain. The sand drain becomes Payne's drain in 1730s, Thomas Paine. I live on the Thomas Paine part of the tract. He had 300 and some acres, we were just 20 of them. His son, Thomas Paine Jr., is buried in our cemetery. This here is the creek where the ferry docks are now, okay? And this would be Greens Point here. And there used to be a windmill here way before my day. How about yours? No? No windmill, okay. It's there on the maps.
I'm just a young fellow.
Okay. Today, in place of that windmill, there is a navigational marker that takes you out of the creek. When I was a little boy, that thing was firmly on land, 100 and some feet. Today, that marker is way out in the water. All right. So here's what I've done in my lifetime, just in this little area. I have put in pilings for docks out here. Let's see, we had our basin in here, the Shoreline Marina, Lisa's Pizza now, this used to be our restaurant, and our land went all the way across, okay, just north of the pier. So I've put in pilings out in the water on the sound side, I've put in pilings all along the bulkhead, in the marina, under these buildings, Highway 12's coming down here. Put in pilings for signposts. So I'm out here just short of the right of way, all along here on both sides. This is the development. The old house I lived in was back here back in the 20s. And all of these have been sold off pretty much. So there's houses all over the place. I've done pilings all through here. Rodanthe Pier. We're putting pilings in the bottom, 23 feet into the bottom. Way out here, which is way beyond where Rodanthe Pier is now. All I'm trying to tell you is I've seen a lot from one side of that island all the way to the other, and I observe what comes up out of the ground, okay? And when I can find wind-blown sand underneath of the water table, that's telling me that sea level has been rising. Well, when I was a student in 1979, the geologists, they didn't want to hear that. Archaeologists didn't either because they're losing their sights. But the geologists in particular did not want to hear anything at all about the rise of sea level. Well, I'm coming up with artifacts, and I know they're artifacts because they got tool markings on them. And they're buried way below the water table, and they're in sand that was put there by wind. These artifacts were laying on the ground, they've been covered up by wind, and then the water table comes up and covers them up. Okay? I just recovered some more just this past week. It happens a lot. Most of it is innocuous stuff, barrel staves, a lot of bottles. Bottles tend to go buoyant. The air's trapped inside of them and then right up to the top. So I realized that sea level is coming up. And then I noticed offshore, when I look out to the edge of the continental break, we have canyons out there. Hatteras Canyon, Norfolk Canyon, Hudson Canyon. They all communicate with where rivers either are now or they used to be. They tried to tell me when I was a student that they were cut by downward cutting turbidity currents. And I was like, okay, but why there? Why do they communicate with the rivers? They don't know, they just do. I say, well, obviously to me, those are drowned river valleys. In other words, the rivers kept running that much further out to the ocean before they actually engaged the water. And they thought I was an idiot. They said, basically, Mel, what you're suggesting means that sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today. And I looked at him, I said, that's exactly what I'm saying. We now know that to be true. Okay? I'm no genius. I'm just looking at things that I know, that I've seen on the island. Just like all of the old timers tried to tell the people who came down here and were not listened to, but were cast aside. Your opinion meant nothing. They've got the PhD. Your lifetime worth of experiences and observations here count for diddly. Pass these around. These are the layers. You see how beautiful those things are? See that? That's layer after layer after layer. That's what our island is built upon. Okay? If you come across an area that doesn't exhibit what we call stratification, you know that that soil has been disturbed before. Man has been there. He's either dumped sand on top of it, or he's filled in a hole, or he dug in a hole and then backfilled it. You cannot dig a hole on this island without leaving evidence that you have been there. I don't care, because you can't put it back the way it was like that. It's not going to happen. And these things show up. The geologists have now come 180 out. They embrace this. They now know that sea level's rising. I think everybody in this room probably accepts to some degree that it's coming up. We haven't been able to quantify it exactly to everybody's expectations. I told him then, I said a conservative estimate is 1 foot of rise in sea level every 100 years. Okay. That being the case, and now they're actually a little more liberal than I am. They say it's come up even more. I'm not going to argue the fine points. I don't want to. All I'm trying to say is it's coming up. And I'm not getting into global warming or anything else, climate change. That's another subject. I'm just reporting what I have seen and trying to render my understanding of what I see before me. So I'm recovering artifacts from down deep. I got offshore canyons, and out here in 50, 60 foot of water, I got an underwater forest. Live oak trees sticking up off of the bottom. Okay? Papers have been written about it. I'm still trying to track them down. I've dived around them. I've seen them on the bottom finder. They're there. Okay? We've got Ice Age fossils that wash ashore at Rodanthe, come up on the beach. I've seen musk ox. I've seen mastodon teeth, tusk, hooves. I've seen all sorts of things. All of these date back to the last Ice Age. That's only 14, 15,000 years ago. And if you extrapolate backwards, you're going to find that when you're down here 400 feet, and all that water is tied up under 2 miles of ice up in the Arctic and in the Antarctic. That stuff is slowly melting off, okay? And the water level is coming up. Timbers that I put in place in the 1970s above water, what we call whales for our bulkheads to attach our sheeting to, I would never install those whales down there where I knew they would be submerged most of the time because shipworm will set into them. Now they're underwater, okay? And they stay underwater just about all the time until a hard wind comes and blows all that water out there. Obviously, it's coming up. The thing that troubles me about academia about this is we got the same group of guys who are cranking out these little coffee table books that you see and buy, and they're nice. They got beautiful photographs in them. And it's all about those islands moving westward. All right? But you go back and you look at their writings when I was a student, and I had to research all this stuff. I've got to quote these people. I've got to include them in my papers. None of them talked about that. And if you did, they would laugh at you, okay? Within 3 years of me graduating in 1980, Army Corps of Engineers, using the same maps, these over here, this one right here, okay? I have a set of these that go from Whalebone Junction all the way to Hatteras Point. It's a series of 5 maps. They analyze those because you can quantify it. They're actually done by survey, and all those survey stations are listed, meets and bounds and distances. So they analyze it and they go, guess what? The islands are not moving westward.
Right.
Still, the geologist would not get off of it. The geologist would tell me that Hatteras Island is not more than 900 years old. Come on, people. I can take you out to Buxton Woods. Mr. Raymond Bassnett, okay? Some of y'all remember Mr. Raymond, his property back there, where the water plant. Okay, you go down that road, you climb up on that ridge, and I guess Judy and George maybe live in this house now?
Park Trail.
Okay. That house is up on the ridge. It must be 30 feet up above sea level, and they've got another hill that's on their property that's up even higher. So I go up on that with permission. Okay, I go up and there is a live oak tree. This is in the middle of the woods. It's the biggest one I've ever seen on this island. Only half of it's gone. It's rotted away. It's hollow. And then, I don't think my spread is much bigger than it is now, but I stood inside of it and did that. Okay, that tree is more than 6 foot across in diameter. There's only a half moon of it. That tree is very old. Think how long it took for the island to lay sand down, for sand to accumulate, for it to become stabilized with grasses and bushes and stuff, and then finally a forest, and then a live oak tree that must be close to 1,000 years old. Now I can speak about the rings, the dendrochronology that's involved with live oaks, because that was part of my study for ecological succession. I'm actually taking cores out of these things, polishing them up and putting them under a microscope so that I can measure and quantify. Ecological succession is not something that they're familiar with. They want hard, fast data, and I cannot provide dates. Mine is only in context. This has to happen before that can happen, which happens before that. It has to. We don't have live oak trees just boom, pop up out of the ocean overnight up on top of a big hill. It's a process that we go through to build these things. They look at all of the ridges that we have. They run parallel, east and west at about 11-degree tilt to the southwest. Okay? And in between we have these swales. We call that a Pocosin, where water stands all the time. The one mistake that I regret on that paper that I wrote was about ancient dune ridges. They call them relic dune ridges, because that's the accepted theory of how those things came to be. And when I was 21, 22 years old, I still wasn't firm enough in my convictions. I didn't have the evidence, so I wrote it in there. I played the game. And for that, I'm sorry, because now I have the benefit of knowledge. And the knowledge is, those are not ancient dune ridges. They're put there by man's incompetence with the land. And that brings us to a whole point in history of what happened on Hatteras Island here. Y'all didn't know that there were a lot of plantations down here, did you? Plantations, full-on plantations, all right? Hundreds of acres of peace. And if you can go to the other sections, I'm going to get you to run through them right quick. Now, can you pull up the menu again? Oh, while we got this here, let me speak to this. This is one feature that I had to battle them over, because I keep finding them in the deed record. These are called the Seaside Hills. They're in Hatteras, they're in Frisco, they're in Buxton. They're in Waves, they're up the beach, and they're in the historical record of the deeds in the early 1700s. But if you listen to the geologist, you only find those things over on the sound side, for whatever reason. But that's not the way it really works out. I work with definitive primary sources only. I'm not getting into conjecture. If it's not bona fide within a grant or a deed or a will, a census, or who signed the Declaration of Independence or whatever, those are the sources that I use. I use anecdotal stories to point me in a direction, but I can never use them to buttress what it is I'm trying to say. It may lead me to what I'm looking for, but it's not useful. I'm going to leave that ground. I cede that ground to everybody else who wants to debate that stuff in ad infinitum. I don't choose to engage. I just want to work with what is concrete. Okay, can you take me on? All right, now when we get down, these are all exhibits. Let's go to the bottom. You see how these are all numbered? I want to get beyond the numbers now. We're into the layers. Okay. Let's go ahead and start with here, with Creed's Hill. Go ahead and pop that out. This is where I was working at when I was a college student. What do y'all see here?
Old tree stumps.
Those are old live oaks, okay? And around them you see sea oats and dunes, okay? Those trees have been dead since the 1700s. It's amazing how long it takes them to rot away. It took me a while to figure that out, a lot of investigation, a lot of interviews with people. that served out there in the 30s, cutting those dead trees up and burning them in the kitchen there at Creed's Hill. Okay.
Where is Creed's Hill?
Just south of Frisco Pier.
It'd be east of it.
I mean, I had the Hatteras.
It's the other direction. The Creed's Hill, you're right about the station. That's where the station
Oh,
is
that's
still
not-
there.
okay.
No. Let's clear this up. That is Creed's Hill Life Saving Station. However, the kitchen was not there. The kitchen was all the way a couple miles to the east, down the beach. And if you've ever been to Frisco Campground, the Park Service Campground, up on the high hills, at the very east end of that, you'll notice that there's a gate and a marl road. And that road's probably another mile long. And at the end of that road, there's a tank on the ground that they use for water. All right? Well, if you back up 3 power poles from that tank, come back towards Hatteras, there on the ocean side is where that kitchen used to be. Their midden is still there, where they used to shuck their oysters and stuff.
Didn't they move it? Move the building?
I don't know what happened to the building.
I'm pretty sure they.
I don't know what happened to the building. I only know where the building was.
Creed's Hill that everybody thinks of as Creed's Hill between Frisco and Hatteras was moved
Okay.
there. So that.
But it wasn't.
that is a Creed's
It
Hill.
wasn't with the kitchen though, because the men that I interviewed said they all had to take the long hike from the barracks and the station all the way out to where the kitchen was. They weren't together.
It wasn't as long. I think Creed's Hill was historically located closer to the Cape.
That would make sense to me.
Where
It would-
he's-
that would
where
make
he's
sense to
talking
me.
about? It would be where he's talking about?
Yeah, or closer in that.
Closer to that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're a good 2.5 miles apart right now. But they said it was a long walk. And again,
That's- Yeah, where the house is now, it was moved.
okay.
Well, I'm
where the-
confused, where was this photo taken?
That big open field up there? Is
That would be
big?
north of that tank that I'm telling you about that's on the ground. If you were to head north up into the woods, you got to cross all of these ridges. Okay.
Towards open ponds?
So you look in behind, and you can see there's Buxton and Frisco Woods back behind the ridge. Ocean's back behind me. Okay. Is that helping? So my study was okay. I've got all of these dead trees, dead live oaks. Boy, it was hard to write about dead live oaks over and over again. But anyway, we say the primary state of succession is when the grasses move in. Well, we're going to say here this is Yanila paniculatus, what we call sea oats. All right. I don't know if they're native here. I don't know if Frank Stick brought them all down like Johnny Appleseed out of his pockets. I've heard both. It doesn't matter. They're there. Ammophila, beachgrass, American beachgrass is out there. That is native. And then we've got these live oaks that were logged out. And those dunes weren't there at that time. You can find a lot of them that are buried, sticking up out of the dunes. So what happened, I'm going back and I'm looking through the historical record, and I finally found out who Solomon Creed was. He shows up in the scene in the early 1800s. And here's his file.
Hey, Mel. 3 minutes.
Okay, this would be a good point. This is the way I try to organize my information before I got on the computer. If it had anything to do with Mr. Creed, if he bought property, he sold property, or he was adjacent to property, it would be in this file, okay? And I've got one of these for every one of the families that I'm working with. They're arranged up here chronologically. This is him buying. This is him selling. And then there's a few in there where it's adjacent. You see the Clark's a little bit more complicated. But by doing this, I can look at there and I don't have to go thumbing through all the papers because all the particulars is there. Thomas Robb in 1763 sold land to Stephen Brooks. It was adjacent in Henry Clark. This is all that in Brigands Bay. 80 acres. This archives tells me where I can find it, the Deceased for Currituck, and there's the book and the page number. All right, so I have a copy of that deed in here, and they're all arranged chronologically. You can see the dates up here in the red ink that I put in the corner. Well, on the back of them, I'll work up the deeds, and anybody whose name is in there, I put it on the back. That means there's a file for them too. So this guy, this is Clark selling to Rob, so if I picked up Rob's file, I find the same exact thing in there, it would be listed in here. So now I'm providing context. Only with a computer, I've taken everything up to the nth degree compared to what I was doing here. This is kind of slow, but I was making progress with it. Again, it's a huge amount of information to try to assimilate at one time and be able to manage. All right, so let's take a break here, and then I'll get on to the next thing.
Is that Rembrandt?
Yeah.
People, I try, I really do.
You're way better than I am.
Tom asked me to touch on something that I really meant to talk about in the lecture. I'm going to simplify this again. We have parallel ridges. The ones I was referring to as the ancient dune relic ridges that I so upset about that I did. Well, Tom, tell them what you said the geologist told you.
Well, the geologists say that these are the result of successive ice ages. They're evidence, but Mel's theory is that they are mismanagement of the land by the humans. I think that's what I understand.
That's exactly right, Tom, and I'm glad you pointed out, because it was one of the contradictions that I come across when I was still a student, okay? We now know sea level's been rising for 14,000 years, okay? I would have bought that argument that they were from ice ages. That would have meant this was going this way, but we know erosion is going that way. Sea level is rising, but yet the ridges are laid out. But they're going to tell you that we're only 900 years old.
Right.
Okay? 900 years old. And we know the Ice Age was back 14,000. There's a huge disconnect. Now, if sea level was falling, I would buy that. Sea level's falling, our island is growing out that way, and the dune ridges are following behind like a treadmill. Except that it's going in the opposite direction. It's a contradiction. And they don't acknowledge that. When they put in the SOSUS cable out here, submarine cable that went out into the ocean, do y'all know what that Navy base was out there for?
Yeah.
Before the Coast Guard? Okay. I knew about it because my dad was a submariner. They found an artifact. It was a hand axe. And back in the early days when I was still in high school, out on the nature trail, they had interpretive markers all over the place. And just run-of-the-mill things, but there were two of them in particular that really stood out in my brain. One doesn't have anything to do with this because it was about the story of the Monitor crewman washing ashore, okay? And the other one was about that 3,000-year-old axe. And I told the archaeologist that. And it's like, well, we'd like to see it. Well, who knows who's got it? The Park Service has got us down in Atlanta somewhere in a box in the dark someplace and never to be seen alive again. But it's on an interpretive marker, so it must have happened. The geologist, they said, well, that can't be 3,000 years old. The archaeologist and the geologist have never agreed in their story. I'm going to side with the archaeologist because it makes more sense. Since that reading of that sign when I was 17, I have held in my hand at least a dozen artifacts that are thousands of years old, much older than that hand axe. I was standing next to Dr. Phelps when Grady Austin, y'all knew Grady? Grady Austin contributed a whole 5-gallon bucket of artifacts that he had collected out of Durant's Point. And he showed him 2 long spear points, and David said, well, you've just pushed the prehistory of Hatteras Island back 12,000 years. 12,000. My daughter, when she was 3 or 4 years old, she was at Johnny and Barbara's, my in-laws, and she was playing out there where the Dollar General, is that the name of it? Mm-hmm. Okay, where that's been built. And she found the most exquisite point that I have ever seen in my life. All right? I mean, this thing is a beauty. It's too big for an arrow point, probably too small for much of a spear point, but it's about 2 inches long. And the edges are serrated. Fine little serrations on it. All right? That's an incredible skill to be able to nap serrated edges up one side and down the other without breaking it off. But even more incredible than that, The tang, where it's hafted into the shaft of the arrow, it's curved. How that man or woman cut that groove in there on a curve, I've looked at 10, 15,000 arrow points since then, and I've never seen another one like it. I've looked at the rock, it's either one of two things. It's either flint, but more likely it's a mineral called hornfels. Hornfels is found where you have volcanic tubes coming up out of the ground where the lava comes out. You have a tube. Well, that material around that forms that tube is getting baked over and over and over again and hardened by all that magma, lava that's coming up through it. That mineral is called hornfels, all right? And it's extremely hard. I mean, it's not diamond hard, but I can take and I can cut a hole through that plate glass window over there. And I can use that arrow point as I demonstrated to my daughter. I can carve your name to the highest quality steel blade that you have. I can etch your name right into it using that point and not break the tip off of it. I showed that to Dr. Phelps. He said, 3,500 years old. By the way, Sarah was very upset, my daughter. It wasn't a shark's tooth. She thought she had a great white shark's tooth. It's probably why she gave it up to her father. If I told her a shark's tooth, it'd be sitting in her jewelry case somewhere. But she's like, yeah, have it. I'm like, Sarah, you know, this is way more valuable. I'll give you shark's teeth. I got lots of shark's teeth. But she wouldn't have any of that. She said, here, take it. It's one of the most prized things I have. I didn't collect it myself. My girl did. Okay, 3,500 years old. Grady's are 10 or 12, and I've seen I don't know how many more, and they all predate anything that any geologist is going to tell you about the age of this island. Okay. Islands are moving westward, right? This is Clark Cemetery. This is up my neck of the woods. I have a great-great-great-grandfather buried in there. Watson Lewis Midget and his wife. And forgive me if her name escapes me right now. Mary, I think, was it?
Mary Louise O'Neill.
Thank you. That's it.
We're closer
You're
cousins
related.
than you thought.
Okay. All right. Well, because of that, I had a vested interest in this cemetery, and I started talking to the Park Service a long time ago before they ever started threatening this westward fence. Okay. And I kept getting different stories every time, and I won't take you into that, my battles with the Park Service. Go ahead and flip to the next. You got it. I just saw it. It was over there. It was there. This is what frustrates me about technology. I wish I knew how to do this stuff.
She's getting it now.
Okay. All right.
No, I just went to that page.
Well, go ahead. It's on the next page. If you can do it that way, that works just as good. Can you scroll it? There you go. There's the way to do it. There's a cemetery, and the fence is way out here in the foreground. That washed away a long time ago. Now we're up into the graves. These are crypts. There's a gravestone. You see this?
Yeah.
That's what's happened to that cemetery. And I'm sure you all heard about the efforts to save it. All the money that's been raised and so forth. The point I'm trying to make is there's no island moving westward. It's going the other way. And everybody who lived on this island who had property on the sound side and had to deal with the fact that their land kept washing away was aware of that long before any late Johnny-come-lately geologist who has since flip-flopped his position, always being in the seat of authority. And that's what bothers me. They were the experts in 1980 when I was a student, and they're still the experts now. But they got two different stories. And my challenge is, okay, go back and look at the dates on the papers that you wrote. Everything is dated. And read what they said and watch the evolution of their opinions. If you're really truly expert that you lend yourself out to be, you ought to know what you're talking about. After all, you're taking money for this, okay? Just be aware that there is a motive behind that. And the motive is, we don't belong out here in their eyes, okay? They want us off the banks. And again, that's another argument, but my family's been here for a long, long time, okay? Some of my family was here before the first white man ever showed up.
Back in the canoe days.
Yes. And for them to tell me that I have no business being out here where my forefathers and their forefathers and my mom and my dad and everybody's laid out there in a cemetery, I'm not having it. It upsets me. just get on to something else. Go ahead and go to the next picture, please. All of these pictures here are basically, I want to show you what the island looks like. You were talking about was nothing but grass and shrub and stuff, and you're exactly right. But each of these visions that we have of what our island was like belong within a specific place and time. And I can tell you, after having pulled up so many stumps and stuff from way below ground, and seeing 4 horizons at Pirates Cove when they excavated it out 14 feet. Imagine that, what you see. Here's a forest floor, all right? And it's growing where trees cannot grow now. It's in the water. We put a coffer dam out beyond that, and they dug down 14 feet. And what I saw below that was about 3 foot of wind-blown sand, no shell, no gravel, all wind-blown sand. And then there's another forest floor. You see the stumps, you see the roots. And then down below that, another 3 foot of sand. And there's another forest floor. These things don't rot once they get below the water table. There's no oxygen down there to speak of, so they're not going to rot away in anybody's lifetime. They're there for a long, long time. I saw 4 distinct layers. When I told the geologist about what I had seen, within 30 seconds, they started telling me how that proved some kind of theory that they had. I mean, they just basically want to talk about themselves and not assimilate the data that I'm trying to get them to understand. Sea level has been rising for a long, long time. And in that same area out there, if you look, the broad expanses, these areas that you see, like in Boddy's Island and Pease Island, where it's just grass out there, it's homogeneous, Juncus grass, Spartina grass, just big wide open fields of it. They didn't start out that way. That's not natural, all right? Those are abandoned agricultural fields. If you drain the water out of the sounds, what you have is marsh now. You take 3.5 foot of water out of it, now you got cropland. And that's why the land is so flat. Now, I'm not making this up. I've got the deeds to back me up. These people were horse trading these deeds and properties every few years. Here's how it works. Ancestor mine, go ahead and go to the next. This is, by the way, this is Chickamauga Code 1899 after the great big hurricane come over. There's 3 pictures here that just devastated the village. Point being, you don't see any trees to speak of,
Right.
okay? And the next picture is Clark's, I think, which is down toward Salvo. Nope, that's the post office in Red Anthony. And I put that in there to show you that, yes, we did have trees in some places. There's a little handle. Okay? Now, had all the wind's blowing all the leaves off of them, basically, but there's a little bit of trees in there still. Okay? The next one is Clark's.
Oh, it could have been winter too with no leaves.
No, actually, this was taken right after the hurricane, a few
Okay,
days after,
all right,
in
all right.
August. Yeah. Or September, whatever it was. This one's September...
1899.
I can't read the number, but yeah. Anyway, September 2nd, I think it was. Look at all that broad beach out in front of Salvo, Clark's. Hard to believe, isn't it? And you don't see any dunes. See, most of the people that come down here, they're under the concept that those dunes are protective. Right, Tom?
Right.
We need those dunes to protect us.
Right.
I simply want to take you back to stratification, all right? When they put those dunes here in the 50s, you've stopped this process. Now the wind's still moving some sand. In other places, the marine deposits are coming over. Think about this. What do? Every time we have a storm, they spend 3 days getting the sand off the highway.
Right.
That's how the island keeps up with the rise of sea level. And when you put a dune out there, you have interrupted that. You're not allowing the island to build up
Right.
at the same rate that the sea level is coming up. There were many men who told the Park Service back in the 50s when they started constructing these dunes, they said, you put those things up and you're going to seal the fate of Hatteras Island. You're going to doom it.
I thought they were built in the 30s by the CCC Corps.
CC Corps did not build many dunes. They did not build many dunes. Most of the dunes were done in the 50-52 era, okay? CC did some. CC did mostly infrastructure of the park. They built the buildings like you see. John, I'm just telling you what I found out. They built the buildings. They built Works all over in the parks, the bricks and mortar stuff, the bridges,
Yep.
all of that stuff. That's all CC core stuff, okay? Frank Stick started salting those sea dunes in the 40s and the 50s. Sea dunes, I got an exhibit in here. We'll talk about dunes for a second. Can you get me to the menu? I want to show you something because all 4 kinds of dunes are in one photograph here. Hatteras Sandwich. Back up this way. Back up this way. Okay, all right. Dune 62. Can you get me to this one? I'm going to show you a picture that was taken after the Ash Wednesday storm.
No, all right.
No, that ain't right. Real dunes are hemispherical, okay? They're conical. What we have here is linear forms. Anytime you see a linear ridge, it's a man-made aberration. All right? If you fly in the air and you look up, what if you keeps coming back? If you fly over, see all these round structures out here? Those are dunes. Those are real dunes. Okay? Now the ones down here at the bottom are the ones that the Park Service built. Then we have the real dunes in here. They're hemispherical. You cut down all the trees and sand starts moving, they start fusing into these round dunes that we have. And that's why when you look at our dune ridges, they're like this. And you have trees up on the points. They're not just flat across like the Park Service built with bulldozers. Okay?
Down like Hatteras Inlet, that one photo you're
pass these
showing
around.
there.
All right.
I think if you looked at that aerially, you'd have seen the same thing down by before, down by the.
I've been on some of those dunes out in that area there. That's, we were talking about Creeds Hill? That's in the other direction towards the beach from my study area, okay? Here's another one that shows it real well. You see these? Here's where the dunes have broken down, the ancient dune relics. But what they didn't know was that all of these plantations come across the island in narrow swaths.
Right.
And it didn't take but so many of those, you and your neighbor, to go cutting down all of the trees to clear for farmland. And all of a sudden you've passed a tipping point and the sand starts blowing. So we had a lot of trees when the white man first got here. But people's recollections don't go that far back, all right? The anecdotal stories that you heard, you'd be hard-pressed to get anything that goes back to the Civil War. So let's fill in the blanks.
Amen.
Okay. We started cutting down trees literally when Reed and his people got here in the early 1700s, all right?
Build houses.
Build houses, the cedars and the pines, but the live oaks we wanted for the U.S. Navy. And the U.S. Navy used those things up until just after Fulton invented the steam engine, okay? We had this little thing called the Monitor and the Merrimack. Before that battle was over, the foreign correspondents who were there waiting for that battle to happen were on the wire sending out the messages that wooden boats are over, do not build anymore, okay? Don't build anymore. We've already seen what's happened. They just destroy them like that. Game over. It's all about metal ships now. And that's what saved the last of the trees that we had around here. If it hadn't been for that, they'd cut them all down. So the trees are cut down, the sand starts blowing. We get a torrential hurricane, 1846, the one that cut Hatteras Inlet and Ocracoke Inlet. By the way, Hatteras Inlet was not cut the first time in 1846. If you look on the 1700 maps, it's there and it's labeled as Hatteras Inlet. It just filled in and it blew back out again. It also cut through an inlet called Loggerhead Inlet, and that's the one that you see on that map over there. Okay, that inlet's only 3 years old when that thing was mapped, and it closed back up. Loggerhead is the S-turns, and you know what kind of battle we've been running at the S-turns ever since. All right, am I out of my 4 minutes?
Right at it.
All right, let's take a break here, because I got one more section, and I got to wrap up a lot of stuff I want to share with you before we close this thing out.
This is great stuff. It's really wonderful. Well, I always say every time they cut a swath of dunes to build a house, they're causing wind erosion. My father would say every time they cut in the trees, like where the the Nature's Preserve, when they were wanting to do that golf course. Harry Lang, he would say, man, they cut them trees. Hatteras is gone because every time you cut a swath of property, you're causing wind erosion and you're killing the trees.
It's happening next to me right now. The property I own next to Tornado Way. My neighbor cut down every tree they had. It was a beautiful live oak tree this big in their front yard. They're from Jersey. And I remarked the first time they walked out there, I said, you can park here on mine and walk over there. They were thinking about buying the property. I said, by the way, that's a beautiful live oak tree you got there. She says, oh, that's got to go. And I'm like, what? You're going to cut that tree down? Yeah, I want a nice, beautiful lawn. And I was like, yeah, there's other lots. If you want a lawn, you could do that. You don't have to do what you do. You don't have to rape the land.
Same behind me.
Well, my forest is dying now.
The guy bought the property behind me, the West's property. They cut down this bay tree that was giant. There'd never been a bulldozer back there ever. And he cut down this, ancient bay tree that was, and he's like, well, we're gonna put a
Dr. Phelps took my artifacts back to school with him.
Did you get them back?
No,
He never did.
I never did. And
They're
I-
probably in East Carolina University right now.
Yeah, well,
I was just asking 2 days ago about what happened to some of that stuff.
yeah, I've almost forgotten, but I growing up since 1930 in Hatteras, I had a large collection of artifacts. And I've almost forgotten what they are now. Yeah, I'm an
Brady
artifact.
never got his 5-gallon bucket back either.
Well, it's just like the Park Service, they said, there was all this furniture at the little house,
I mean, that's one of the things.
and they took all the furniture out of it, came off one of the shipwrecks. They took all the furniture out of the one little place by the White House and took it to Manio, and they said they were gonna return it, but they never returned it.
He said that, well, he wanted to look at the dunes.
We're done. We're done. Let's go
Furniture,
back to
different
things again.
chairs
All
and
right.
tables and stuff.
House full of stuff, and I wonder what's happening to it.
If anybody ever read the letters that's in Manio, when they were acquiring
These
the
are all the
land,
things that we've been talking about earlier. So
Park
just forget
Service,
about
if
those.
anybody
Everything
read
on
the
top.
letters
We'll skip over all that
of the
stuff.
people who came down to negotiate with the people in Rodanthe, the language that was used was extremely insulting that no lady or person from Rodanthe heard. Bothersome, when Mr. Dan Oden was pressured to sell where the Durant was, they didn't care that he had a heart attack, he had 3 days to get it off, to get those buildings off. They were very insensitive.
People are running short of time because I ramble and I talk too much about certain things. I really want to let you know, and I know you all want to get to the more important stuff. We lost it. Hey, go back up 1 second. I want people to see that one.
That one?
No, that one there. Is that not a beautiful photograph, people? Huh? Did anybody know where that was taken out on Hatteras Island?
It's not Isabel.
That looks like, that looks like the inlet to the.
It was an inlet. There's no doubt about that. There's an inlet. This is the Atlantic Ocean out here, and that's Pamlico Sound.
Is that the new, it could be any inlet, but is that the new?
This is the one north of Buxton. This is Chacan Depico reborn in 1962. And you'll see it again if you live here long enough. It'll be coming through.
I'm gonna put out a sign that says Liz's Bait and Tackle, because I live in.
Well,
I'm gonna have a marina.
I've always been mesmerized by this photograph, but what I want you to see this is, it breached through, the water came through, but every time the water comes in, it's got to go back out. Okay? So here's the water going back out. It's flowing back out. Look at all these. There's one that dead ends, this one dead ends, that one dead ends, this one dead ends, that one dead ends. It comes back out with a little bit less force than what it came in. Okay? And it's not always enough to clear out the channel to leave you with a serviceable channel. The shipwreck that I was working on in Sand Dollar Shoals, the same thing happened. Storm of 1899. The only thing that saved Mr. Gaskell, the captain, and his wife from sheer death was one of these things here. The ship is coming through and it runs around at the very end of it. Can you imagine? It's like hanging onto a cliff by your fingernails. And the storm passed and left them alive. Okay, let's go on. That's
So that was Buxton Inlet?
yeah, that's 1960 Ash Wednesday storm,
I have a picture of
1962.
my sister and I on the highway.
By the way, that was taken on my birthday when I was
Yeah.
6 years old.
I'm not sure
Creed
where
Hill
it is.
going by. Okay, here's our sand dunes. All right, we've cut down the trees and the sand is moving. This is 1890. The article is done the sand waves of Henlopen, Cape Henlopen, and Hatteras. And you see how it's already killed these trees. Notice how the slope here is gentle and it's steeper on the other side. The crest has a zag line, okay? And this poor tree is about to meet that same fate. This is caused by man. Okay, so these are not ancient dune relic ridges. And the other reason that I know that they're not ancient relic dune ridges is because when I dig to the bottom of them, when I'm putting in foundations, like at Lou Browning's, his grandparents. So,
This is one of,
help me out here. How old is that house?
oh, the one on the sound side?
Yes,
in
yes.
Buxton.
It's between Indian Ridge and
Yeah.
Buxton. How long ago has that been? My time flies for me.
I can't remember when we built it.
Okay.
It's probably about 60 years old, maybe.
How, 16?
60.
No, this is one I put the foundation in
The
for.
one Lou built?
Yes,
No, that was built in the
90s?
early
What?
70s.
Early 70s. Okay. Anyway, Lou excavated the dune out. He wanted a basement. Then he had us dig a hole down in the bottom of that for the pilings that went in. I'm down 13 feet above the top of that ridge. I measured it. 13 feet. And what do I find at 13 feet? But another forest floor. And on top of that forest floor, I've got handmade brick, I've got ceramics, I've got glass, and I've got wrought iron pieces. Okay?
Oh, wow.
That's 13 foot of sand that's been brought in there, and that's all forested over. And a geologist would tell you that's an ancient dune relic. And I'm going,
Yeah, I'm going to get my shot.
the geologists do not have the benefit of the experience that some of us do. I've got more than most because unlike most of the people who dig holes, and nobody has dug anywhere close to as many holes on this island as I have in my lifetime. I want you to know that now. But I'm one of the few hole diggers that actually knew what he was looking at besides just a hole in the ground.
Right.
Okay? Please continue on. We've seen this. Okay, Shell Castle Island. This is out next to where I was working on the Civil War fort, Beacon Island. And what I want you to notice is, we can go to the next picture, you can see it even better. I got two of Shell Castle. There's the wharf. All right? In times past, the geologists would always say you're losing the shoreline to erosion. All right? And we do. There's no doubt about that. Erosion takes its toll. But that's not subsidence. That's a wharf and it's underwater. It's under about that much water. The sea level has risen up since 1700s when Shell Castle was the most valuable piece of real estate in the entire state. All right.
Where's that at?
Shell Castle, behind Portsmouth Island,
Okay.
north of Portsmouth Island. Okay. Going by that one. Oh, here. Remember I told you about we were plantations? I want you to run right through these right quick. This is Thomas Austin. Okay, this is his plantation of 144 acres. That's a small one, Hatteras Banks. Thomas Paine, 640 acres. This is actually across the Sound, Longshaw Point. All right, but he also had land on my side. I told you I grew up on the Thomas Paine tract. Who we got here? This is Chickamaucomicock Banks. I believe that might be Daniel. Is that Daniel? Did I find that in there? That's Thomas Paine's. That's his other one. Please continue. These are trees, by the way. You see where he scribbles and draws a little tree?
Is this one on the banks?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. On the Sound side here, Chickamaucomicock Banks, beginning of the state, blah, blah, blah. Who's it for? 640 acres of land. Thomas Paine again, keep going. Now we're talking. This is down around the ferry docks, okay? This is how I figured out Selby, my cousin Selby Gaston. His name is a surname, all right? And there's like 10 different spellings of Selby. This one here is Sibley, all right? Mr. Sibley has a plantation. It's a small one tucked in Durant Bay. Okay. Durant name goes back before Lawson got here. George Durant was alive in the 1640s, right? In the 1670s, he took part in Culpeper's Rebellion. Thomas Miller was chased out of office, ran back to England, died in prison. These guys are older than Lawson, but their names are here before Lawson ever showed up. It's just one of the many clues that lets me know that Europeans were here before Lawson got here. And plenty of time to make blue-eyed babies with auburn hair. Okay? Now, just go ahead and flip through them. This is Stephen Brooks. Brooks Point in Brigands Bay is named for Stephen Brooks. Stephen actually had about 5 plantations here. Thomas Robb. Thomas Robb was the grandson of Henry Davis. Henry Davis was the one who was right next to Indiantown. He got his grant in 1716 and it adjoined Indiantown. Okay?
This is the early 1700s we're talking about right here?
Pardon?
Early 1700s?
1716 is when Davis got his property.
Okay.
This is Hezekiah Farrow. This is up Cape Creek area. All right? I mean, I probably throwed about 20 of them in there. Most of them were done by Christopher Neal. Jacob Farrow. 54 acres. That's a small one. One of my favorites, James Wahab. Tom.
Mel and I have talked a number of times about what's called the plantation area on the island, and we think of plantations, it's always like Harrow with.
Gone with the wind.
But basically, the term plantation in our context of the island is simply a grant of land which is farmed or used or, for wood or whatever. Could you?
You had 3 years. You had 3 years to get it seated, which means somebody is living on it, and the land cleared and planted. And if you didn't, somebody else could steal your land, take it out from underneath of you. Okay. The reason why most of this is not common knowledge to the people who investigated, they didn't realize just how cosmopolitan we were. They would have you believe that we're all kind of inbred and isolated out here. And the fact of the matter is, when I look at my pedigree, my genealogy, my mom's side, I've already got 30 families, and half of them are over on the other side of the Sound. What I found was, these people, they own land all around the Pamlico Basin, okay? If you had one plantation here, you had another one over at Mount Pleasant. You might have another one on Roanoke Island, Stumpy Point, down to Ocracoke. One other one in Kennekeek. They're all over the place. But if you look at it in the county records, you're going to miss out on that because the man's in 3 or 4 counties. He doesn't show up as a great big landowner. I get 500 acres, all right? I'm going to use Daniel Midget, the plantation in Ways, for example, 1780s. He got his right when we finished up the war, 1783. He keeps 100 acres for himself. He keeps 100 acres for his brother. He's got 300 acres left over. He sells those off in 50-acre parcels, all to family members, okay? They, in turn, they got plantations over there, and they're doing the same thing. You see what they're doing? They're covering their bases. If I got all my eggs in this one basket, the storm comes by, and my field gets wiped out, I'm done for. But if I've got 4 or 5 plantations all over the place, or even 3 on the island, okay, one storm is not going to take out all 3, generally speaking. They're covering their bases. Not only do they have a plantation where the crops are grown, a plantation, they're cutting the trees. That's the first thing you got to do. You have a shipbuilding thing going on for your periaugers, your schooners, your barges, and your canoes that you got to have to transport all of that stuff from one side of the Sound to the other. Most of the windmills are out here, okay? So there's a lot of commerce going back and forth. To think that these people were isolated and incommunicado with the rest of the people out there makes no sense at all. Because you can go over to the other side, and my brother will be running that plantation over there. And you know what? His kids got the same names that mine got, because we're honoring the same people. And that led to a lot of confusion too. Okay? All right. You don't have, that's John Van Pelt. That's another name. Anybody heard of the Van Pelts on Hatteras Island? Or the Campbells, for that matter. The Holts.
Yeah,
They're here now.
Oaks were.
Yes, yes. We're a lot more cosmopolitan than we're ever led to believe.
Right.
Henry Black. Who was Teresa? Did she? Thank you.
From my husband's side, there are a lot of Henry Blacks.
Oh, I imagine so. I mean, it's a big family. Black is one of the names that I'm working up in that dossier. It's one of the 200 names, okay? That was Cape Creek, and this is the one that led me to Indiantown. That's William Elks and the rest of the Hatteras Indians. Do you see that? Right here? 200. The 200 stands for 200 acres in Currituck. We were Currituck County at that time. I've got the translation in the book. I won't bother you with it now. This is typically what we see when you're going through the microfilm. I've had that microfilm placed on CD, high resolution CD-ROM, so I can really work with them now instead of making the trips up there and working with microfilm. It just drives my eyes crazy. I don't want you to quit going on these. Now we can start talking about the stuff that y'all really want to know about. I'm going to give you a quick crash course in history because everything to me is about context, all right? We all know Columbus was here in 1492, and excuse me for speaking from notes. I usually do this extemporaneously, but I'm not a historian. So in order to get everything accurate, I have to write things down. 5 years later, we get John Cabot here representing the English. He's further north. You got to go to 1524, and the French get into the act. A man by the name of Giovanni de Verrazzano. His bridge is up there in New York City now, okay? Next year, Allion from Spain, he tries to inhabit Cape Fear. None of these things work out. This is a hard land to conquer, all right? And it goes on. Hernando de Soto comes up from Spain. He's from Spain. He comes up from Florida. He goes all the way to the North Carolina mountains and hangs a left. He catches a river that flows in the opposite direction, and he follows it all the way to the Mississippi River, and guess what? De Soto discovered the Mississippi River. 1540. 1558, Queen Elizabeth takes the throne. Now, that's real important to us. A couple years later, the French try to settle in South Carolina. That don't work out either. Fails. Elizabeth authorizes Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Does that name mean anything to anybody in here? Gilbert's one of the families that I'm researching.
Yes.
Tell them who Humphrey Gilbert is.
I've got him. I even got a picture of one of the Gilbert ancestors. But
No pictures back then now. Portraits.
It's in Mama's, and Mama was from Elizabeth City.
Okay.
He was half-brother to Walter Raleigh.
There you go. Older half-brother to Walter Raleigh.
Yes, I know that.
Okay. Well, that's what I was searching for. I'm sorry. Anyway, he gets the charter.
No, Sir Walter Raleigh never set foot in North Carolina.
No, he did not. He did travel around a lot, but he never made it here.
You hear them refer to when Walter Raleigh was Walter Raleigh was
Walk
here.
these sandy shores.
So Gilbert gets the charter in 1578. All right. He dies at sea. Charter's handed over to Raleigh in 1584, and the expeditions begin. All right. First one comes over here. They arrive in North Carolina. He picks up Manio Wanchis. And by the way, there was a third Indian. I think his name was like Tawano or something like that. But he died, so everybody forgot about him. But there was three. All right. So, third expedition, we have Raleigh gets the charter. Richard Grenville, second one. He comes here with Ralph Lane and 107 men. Those men are split up in three places. Port Ferdinando, which is up by Oregon Inlet. Faction was at the fort. And a guy by the name of Captain Edward Stafford and 20 men come to Hatteras. More specifically, they come to Croatoan. Okay? And I do believe that site that we've been working at Cape Creek is where Stafford had at least some of his men. You think about that. The Indians are going to welcome the white man here. Do you want them exactly in your town, or do you want to let them park outside? Okay? You keep them out there. You can keep an eye on them, but you're not bringing them into your house. He's at Cape Creek. The reason he's at Cape Creek is he's got to keep an eye on the shipping routes that are going back and forth. And indeed, while he's down there, he sees a fleet of 23 ships come by. He sends a messenger up to let them know up in Roanoke what's happened. But what happened was, that was Sir Francis Drake. He shows up here as a rescue mission. All right? So we got Drake is in the scene. This is 1586. They're hit by a hurricane. And that caused real problems for the people. They were supposed to have a boat that was left behind. All of a sudden, he doesn't have a whole lot to work with. Before he had 23, now he doesn't have hardly any at all. So they head home. But before he goes home, he leaves 300 South American Indians and slaves on Roanoke Island. They don't go back. 3 men got left behind too. They were out on the expedition. We know what happened to them. They disappeared. Jamestown did not get the first slaves. Roanoke Island did by 20 some years. Okay? So Grenville comes back. He's got 400 men this time, and for some reason he only leaves 20 behind at Roanoke Island. Well, we know what happened to them. And then the 4th colony shows up in 1587, and that's our lost colony. White's gone for 3 years. He comes back, and now the story unfolds. The colony is lost. All right? So we're going to advance forward. 1602. Raleigh still has his charter. He hasn't lost his head yet. Okay? He sends a search party over here. That fails too. And now we're on to Jamestown, 1607. The very next year, Captain John Smith, sends an expedition down into North Carolina area to talk to the Indians and find out what happened. And he hears rumors. They've got 4 men, 2 boys, and a woman. Virginia Dare could be the lady who carved the first Dare stone. All the others are definitely forgeries. The first one, maybe, maybe not, but it does fit in. This past week, I was out there helping to dig out by Cholonoke to try to continue that story. All right. 1609, the next year, we've got, that's the rumor I just told you. 1625, King James dies. 1629, Charles I grants all of the land from St. Augustine, Florida, up to the south shore of Albemarle Sound to Sir Richard Heath, and he don't do much of anything with it. He loses it a few years later. The Howards enter the picture. Lord Maltravers. Henry Frederick Howard. So now it's all his. And by the way, that goes from ocean to ocean. They don't know how far it goes. It's just between these 2 lines, it's all theirs. All right? So we're moving right along. In 1638, the rights are surrendered to Maltravers, and in 46, Berkeley's militia is sent down to defeat the Chowanokes. And this is important. All right? 1646, the Chowanokes start selling off their land. Indians are selling land to the settlers, and we don't know where most of those deeds and grants are, but we do know that the king said, you got to give them back. All right? Because the king takes over the land. When Charles ascended in 1660, the Lord Proprietors are set up in 63. All right? And Captain Anthony Long Points, Long Shoal, Long Creek, he's given permission to settle Carolina, and William Drummond is the governor. I do believe that Drummond Lake up in Dismal Swamp is named after William Drummond. And that's the start of the area when I started looking for names, and I worked my way down from the Chesapeake area all the way to Ocracoke. And I come across a whole bunch of names. I'm going to skip the rest of the history because you all want to know about these other people. Okay, I wish I had another map that I could show you the entire seaboard area here. Mingo Creek is in Kitty Hawk. All right, Mingo Creek. Mingo was a slave. Mingo went back and forth the ocean more than any one man that I have ever found. He must have been, I don't know if he was a free slave or if he was still working for his master, but he was making trips back and forth on a regular basis. Like a frequent flyer, only he's sailing the ocean. It's not just slaves and commerce people. The women are doing it too. Mary Williams, she must have made 15 or 20 trips. Now, there's probably a couple of Mary Williamses thrown in there. You all sort that out for me, okay? All I work with is the name. When the name got here and when the name left. All right. Now, somewhere I have a list of all the names, and I guess I'm going to have to do it from memory. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Huh? Yes, no, that's in the beginning. I want you to go all the way to the last page. The very last page. All the way, send it all the way. That's the first page. You got 1,000 and some pages to go to. I'm serious. This database that I have now is 225,000 words, 1,011 pages, and it grows almost every day except for this week. I haven't added to it at all. I've been so busy trying to put something together to share with you all. Oh, you're going to have to go way further than that. Let me do it. Can we come up? First I got to get off of that. I need my bar so I can take it all the way to the bottom. If you can do that and bring up that last page. Page 1011.
I've got to get the back up. I can try to get that bar back.
Yeah, if we can get the bar back, I can slide it all the way down the bottom in a hurry.
That's
F down here.
Yeah.
It hit the F, that's over here. Either one of them will work.
Either?
Yeah, either will do. Okay. You're into the list. You're not into the F drive.
Okay.
What I'm looking for is, all right, no, we can do it, there's another way around. I got a shortcut. Bring it all the way up to the very last one of these, and you're gonna see where it says surname research. And if you click on that, it'll take you right to it. There you go. Click on that now. Okay. I did think of a few things. All right. Here's my list. Now you're back to that. Now, if you'll get rid of that and give me the bar so you can slide it down.
That's not doing it. Here we go.
He's doing it. Yeah, numbers are going. Yeah, you were making progress. You're on page 325 already.
There we go.
We're into the Clarks.
You said it's like
325 pages, and I'm only into the C's.
more than
No,
that.
she's trying.
Those are
Screens, that's just the way it's doing it.
okay. Because there's about 3 or 4 screens in each page, I'm guessing.
There we go.
You're in Williams. You're real close. Wilson's. That's
Yeah,
next to the last
yeah.
family. Wimble's the last. Keep going. Keep going. You're almost there. Here we are. Back up just a little bit. Pre-loss in 1701. I got Lake Drummond. All right. That's not bona fide. We don't know if William Drummond was not, but he fits in the time frame. Knott's Island, James Knott. He's here in the 1660s. Monkey Island, John Monk. Collington Island, we know about Sir John. He's one of the 8 proprietors. That's way before Lawson ever got here. There's my guy Mingo. Weir Point. Weir is a family name up by the Ware River, Ware Creek. All right, John Weir. Scarborough Creek, Roanoke Island. Lux Island. This only shows up on one map in the 1630s. One map. That's it. And I've only got 2 Lux that it could be. Edward, who got here first, and Thomas. And I want to talk about Thomas for just a second. Because here's what clued it all in for me. I'm getting all of these names. I haven't even got to Hatteras Island yet. Lux Island is up off of Roanoke Island. I mean, we're working our way south. What I found out was, would you believe that some of these people came across here on the same boat? They knew each other. All right? And not only did they come across on the same boat, but a gentleman by the name of Colonel Edmund Scarborough, the biggest landowner in all of Accomack County, who has no less than 12 plantations up there, and all of those are thousands of acres, not little things like I was showing you there. Mr. Scarborough is a big player, okay? And he's sending people down here. Lux Island, Doug Island, Robert Doug. Again, there was only one Doug. Body's Island, William Body. My ancestor, Matthew Bidget, when he got the land from the king in the early 1700s, he got Body's Island. All right? It already had a name. Already had a name. That's William Body. Scott's Marsh, that's listed in Matthew Bidget's as well. Scott's Marsh, Scott's Wreck, Scott's Muck, Scott's Reef. Scott's Reef is 3 miles from where I grew up. You got 2 brothers, Edward and Stephen. They're up in the Pasquotank area in the 1660s. Greens Point. Well, I don't know what to make of this one because I can find greens everything all the way around the whole basin. All right. Ocracoke has 2 of them. Hatteras has got 1. Greens Point and Rodanthe up in Currituck. Kendrick's Mount. I know there's been a lot of speculation about where Kendrick's Mount is. It's Chickamaucomico. Remember that point that I was telling you about? When all that sand is blowing? Think Jockey's Ridge in Rodanthe. Okay? And there he is, Edward Kendrick. Bates Beach, Nathaniel Bates. I was out looking for some of his stuff Tuesday and Wednesday out in Chowan. We know he was out there in 1655. Vane's Pole is in Chickamaucomico. That's on Wallace's grant. This is one of his 4 markers. A lookout cypress, a lookout cedar. These are big trees. They don't grow in Rodanthe like that anymore, and I have never seen a cypress tree in Rodanthe. They're all long gone. Ecological succession is very evident in the deeds. Okay. William Land, he's in Chickamaucomico. John Lewin, he's here. John Lewin and a fellow by the name of Christopher Butler and Thomas Butler. He married his widow, but they're living next door to each other in Chickamaucomico. They were in the 1660s. Reno, I have not been able to figure out who in the world he is. That's one of the ones that I'm still working on. Tom Fisher Creek, that's in Waves. Tom Fisher, he came over with the rest of them on those boats. And there he's got his creek. Patrick's Line, that's Daniel Midget's plantation. That would be the day use area, Salvo day use area down where the cemetery is. I'm working my way down. Clark Island, that's the one that was off of that cemetery when I was a boy, and it's washed away. It's still on the deeds. This is why we call Clark Clark's, William Clark, or Clarksville, whatever you want to call it. All right. Just south of there, not even a mile, we got No Egg Island. You read the books about place names, they tell you it could be no egg. Somebody's being sarcastic. It's an answer to Egg Shoal, No Egg Shoal. No, it's not. It's not No Wake either, because it's a shoal when you can't get waves up there because the water's so shallow. It's because of James Noakes, 1660s. Jenkins Hammock. I believe that's John Jenkins, another one of Culpeper rebellions. He was a temporary governor. I told you when Thomas Miller abdicated, took off and went to Virginia, and then from Virginia went to England and died in prison. John Jenkins was one of the interim governors for a while, and he also participated in the rebellion. Askins Creek, you all know about. I think that came after Lawson's, early 1700s. Ward's Creek. Ward's Creek is up by just past Jolly's Creek, Ward's Creek, Cape Creek. They're all in the same stretch of the area. Okay. Jolly's Creek, James Jolly. James Jolly came over with Thomas King on the same boat. Thomas King, that's Indian Town. When they divvied it up, Thomas King is the creek that all of the deeds part from. Thomas King was not an Indian. Don't listen to him, okay? Thomas King was an Englishman. I got him over on the mainland in the 1680s getting in all sorts of trouble. But he was here before then. And there's Lambert's Marsh, and I can only find one Lambert, and that's Thomas Lambert. But all of these names always fall within that 10-year span. That's what got me to connect all this. I look at them beyond that, and the dates won't match up because the names are already here. These guys are too recent. I got to find names that are older or that age before them.
What 10-year span is that?
Which one?
Which 10-year span is that? What
1655, 1665. That's when all these gentlemen are showing up and they're coming across in the boats. And Edmund Scarborough is bringing 100 to 150 people at a time. And he's got 10 of the plantations, okay?
I understand many of them came into a port of entry through an inlet up by the Virginia-North Carolina line.
Yes, they did.
No longer exists.
That's true.
That true?
Currituck Inlet closed in, what was it, the late 1600s, early 1700s. I have the port records for some late 17 records for Roanoke and Port Currituck both. So it was still open to a certain period of time. They said it got closed by a hurricane. And after that, Knott's Island basically died off. It was a thriving place until the inlet closed, and then the commerce took it over. It just...
Well, when you were talking about in that period of time, you mentioned earlier Accomack.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about Accomack,
Mm-hmm.
eastern shore of Virginia?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And so you thinking people came in there and then came from there down to these banks?
They came in three ways, is what I'm seeing, okay? The historical record says they came in through Chawanoke, back through the Albemarle Sound in our direction. Albemarle Sound wasn't called Albemarle Sound back then, it was the River of Carolina. Because if you kept sailing out of Albemarle Sound, you'd go right out into the ocean. That inlet was south of the one you're talking about. Right. One of the slides that you saw briefly was Chickamauga River, okay? I drove by it on my way up to Baltimore when I take the Eastern Shore route. It was on Lawson's map, the river's up there, and it's right next to Hooper Strait, Meakin's Neck, I forgot what else. There's the people who came down from the Eastern Shore.
Oh, okay.
Scarborough's bringing them down. So you got one route, think about it, they just hop in their boats and they come down the shoreline. Isle of Wight County is another one. Those people, Isle of Wight, Nazaman, and Lower Norfolk, they're actually coming through what is called the Green Swamp, which we call the Dismal now. Remember, the water table is a lot higher. And sometimes you can get through it a lot easier than others. I know they were here already in the 1650s up in Currituck. And by the way, Currituck is not a North Carolina name either. Currituck Creek is right close by the Chickamauga River. Same people. You begin Creek in Currituck, hey, you find it up there. Most of the names that you find down here, you find up there. Go ahead.
Scarborough and Pugh were the two names of the Hatteras Indians the year they applied for recognition.
Yep. Mhm.
Okay.
Scarborough and Scarborough Town. I believe Edmund Scarborough, his son. The first Scarborough, it wasn't him. He was a captain, Captain Edmund Scarborough. His son was a colonel, and it's the colonel who was doing all this stuff. The colonel had some other sons. He had Edmund Jr., 3 daughters, Tabitha, Matilda, and I can't remember the last of them. And every one of those had great big plantations too, multiple ones. They're very, very wealthy people. So here's Mr. Scarborough's situation, all right? It's the 1650s, 1660s. He's bringing in all these people by the boatload. He's getting 50 acres of land for every head that he brings in. And he brings in 100 to 150 people to crack. I can open that book and I can show you what he did 4 or 5 of them in like 3 years span.
He owns North
Okay, so-
Carolina.
He's rocking and rolling. He is big time. So here's his play. They're using up the resources. They've come cut down the trees. All right, he's planting. But he's got to expand. He can't go to the north. It's already owned up by the royalty. Same thing across the bay. He can go down to the lower part of Chesapeake Bay. He's run into resistance there. People own the land. But once you get across the state line, now you're down here into proprietors. This is the king's land. Okay? This is not owned by the governors or anybody else in the feudal system that they're used to, what they left behind. There's nobody down here except for the Hatteras Indians to stop him from taking the resources off of the island. And that's why I believe James Jolly and Thomas King and the rest of these guys that have creeks named after them, Thomas Fisher, you're never going to find a deed or a grant. These guys never owned the land. At best, they were squatting on it long enough to do what the damage they had to do and get that product back up to the kernel.
Yeah.
And that's the connection.
Also, there's, you mentioned that in 1660, we saw sort of an invalidation of the whole deed process, right?
Well, there was a lot of stuff happening. They were very turbulent years. And
Yeah, so exactly, from a bureaucratic standpoint, just for them to get their act together.
again, it's all in context. And I want to bring that up to you because 1660, Charles II, he gets on the throne, okay? 63, the proprietors are in business. 64, 65, the Great Plague breaks out in London. They got their hands full. Next year, it's just something called the Great Fire. London halfway burns down. And then within less than a year, they're fighting the French and Dutch War. They're clearly preoccupied with what's going on over there. Then they developed this 1668, the Great Deed of Grant, and that's what bases all of the proprietary grants. I'm just getting into those now because everything I've worked with goes up to 1666. I'm about to finish up the letter S and W, and then I'll be done on the second volume. Okay? So then they adopt the grand model. And basically they said, if you can come to North Carolina, your first 5 years, they're free. And your taxes, you got debts. You left debts behind in Virginia, and I know some of mine did. Okay? They come down here, you can't touch them because of that law. And my first year's taxes are free. That's an incentive to come down here and populate the area so they can start making money on us. Okay? Okay. All right. So we got Culpeper's Rebellion, the Glorious Revolution right after that when James is deposed. Bath County is formed between Albemarle and Pamlico River. Lawson visits in 1701, and then within 3 years the Huguenots arrive. Jeannettes, midgets, Barnetts. Okay?
That picture.
We've got 4 precincts. Pasquotank, Perquimans, Chowan, and Currituck. We're part of Currituck. 1710, the Swiss are in New Bern. And then we're getting close to William Elkes' time when they got the land. 1759, and the Indian story comes to a close on Hatteras Island within 20 years. It's done. It's over with.
So, I know she's closing us down. With the Huguenots, the family names that you used as the Huguenots, did they come as a religious group, do you think? Or did they just
really
all
matter?
happen to be...
No, they were kicked out. They had been kicked out of France the century before.
Well, that part I know, but,
Okay.
but when they came, midget coming down from
Annapolis.
area, and supposedly being a Huguenot.
Kind of fits in.
Yeah, but is he being kicked out?
A lot of them, I understand, settled around the Bath area, which is also where you found the Burris and a couple hundred acres that John Lawson knew.
Mm-hmm.
And between 1700, the a lot of the Huguenots who were settled in that area and a lot of the other planters in that area suddenly were out here. But there was Tuscarora War going on that
Wrapped it up by 1713, and now you have a real estate boom happening on Hatteras Island.
a lot of people tried to get out here from Bath to get away. And the interesting thing I was reading was that there are Odins. A lot of the same names are in the Bath area historically as there are out here. So that was the early 1700s.
Most of them was Odeon back then, Odeon, or Odium. And then Odin, I guess what shows up around a little bit before the Civil War. But it's all the same name, same
Michael's
family.
got one that's ODIN.
Yeah, and they're in my.
We had a King's Grant
Yep,
for the property that my grandfather
I've got
was
it
on,
listed. I do.
and it was an ODIN.
Sure enough. See, you have to understand that a lot of the population was, I'm not going to say illiterate, but they couldn't read or write very well. When you went to have an official document made and you were sitting before whoever it was, I'm going to tell you my name and you're going to write it down. But I can't spell it for you.
But also the demand for consistency in spelling didn't happen until about 1800.
It didn't. E's always came before I. When you saw the word field, it was F-E-I-L-D. Tell that to my computer because I got to correct it every time. All right.
And then now, on another thing with names,
Double letters.
I find some of the names are interesting, like the Missouri, like the Dan, Queen, Odin. Was his middle name Queen because he was somehow lineal, but I'm just saying.
His mom was in the Queen family.
But what I'm saying is some of the names here of people, destinations, or some of their middle names or names because of destinations or symbolically named. Because the Odin, the Queen Odin, I found that kind of a unique name. What was the connection?
Queens Creek was one of the first places settled outside of James City. Queens Creek, and that was named after the Queen family.
That's what I'm kind of looking at
That's
too.
what
with the
you gotta
names
look
that
for.
you look up to. What significance is in some of the names that people have?
Well, y'all know about Bannister, Midget, Bannister? That name mean anything to you? Bannister is
know it,
applied to
yeah.
it. He's in the Grays, he's in the Scarboroughs, he's
Yeah.
Bannister was the last name with two N's, and that was Joseph Bannister. Before him was William Bannister, and I can find him way in the early records, okay? Bethany Bannister Farrow. Her mom was a Bannister. Bethany is blessed with the last name now becomes her middle name, Bethany Bannister Farrow. Okay?
Right.
She has a son. She has two sons, Daniel Midget, who I mentioned to you before, and his brother, Bannister Midget. So you've had a last name that became a middle name, which is now a first name. And he dropped an N along the way. Most of these old spellings, by the way, if that man's name is listed in that document multiple times, it's spelled multiple ways.
Oh, right, that is
He's
correct.
covering his bases. It's like, I'm gonna spell it 3 different ways. I'm gonna get it
It's
right.
like
Hopefully.
Stowe. There's S-T-O-W, then there's S-T-O-W-E.
All of them. You ought to see a deed that says Chickamaucomico in there, or whatever they said it back then, because I've got 30 variations. They would scribble it out with that pen, and then they would start another one right beside it. It's comical.
It's interesting.
Well, it's
Your name was
handwritten.
phonetic,
It's
huh?
also all handwritten. so
Every bit of it.
Transcription. I found in one of the censuses, I found the family Bumpus
Heck yeah.
in Hatteras Village.
Right.
Well, when I looked at the first names, I realized it was my grandfather's family. Somebody just transcribed Burris as Bumpus.
Right. Right, that's what, yes.
So it's,
Folks, I'm gonna wrap it up here. I had so much more I wanted to share with you, but it started out as a talk over a cheap bottle of wine. And by the way, we're still going to do that, aren't we? Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Pardon?
Can I ask you an opinion about something real quick?
Sure.
Maybe just to clarify.
I got an
some
opinion
context
about
there.
everything.
So, it's interesting to me that when we're looking at the maps around Lawson's time, that we're not seeing these names, as geographical landmarks as part of the map. And that sort of would suggest that, to some degree, not necessarily respecting, but we're showing leeway to the native names that were given to these areas.
Lawson's emphasis was on the natives. He wanted to trade with them. Lawson was many things, not only representing the colonial governor, but he's a cartographer, he's an ambassador, but he's also looking out for himself. It's all about trade with the Indians. John Jenkins?
So you think Lawson was making a deliberate effort not to give European names to any landmarks, even though he might have heard or mention of those kind of things?
Oh.
That's possible. I never really considered it in that way, but you
Because
may be
then
on
we're
something
talking about a
there.
gap, but we don't have these things
Right,
yet. You're
right.
implying that there was.
But there's a lot, it's an empty slate,
Yeah.
basically. He could have filled in a lot of places,
Right, yeah, he
I'm
did.
sure, but
Yeah.
he didn't. He didn't. Yeah, that's
Maybe
true.
that's why. I don't know, I'm trying to figure out why.
It might have been in deference to his companion, his traveling companion. Nobody talks about the guys that make it happen. It was an Indian named Inouye, and without Inouye, Lawson would have been dead a lot sooner than he did die. Of course, you know what happened to
Probably
him.
telling him what these names are, he's figuring it out.
Oh.
He's his interpreter, he's his guide, he's his go-between. Like, hey, don't kill this man. Hear him out first, you know?
And, the culture's changing so much that to name it after, to use the European name on the map, that might be something
Well,
that's gonna change.
What I find in those deeds is everything starts out on waterways. It's all based upon the rivers into the creeks into the branches into the swamps. And you'll be given an Indian name because that was the only name that was there. But pretty soon that plantation owner has put his name on it.
Yeah, right.
So sometimes you will see, happens all the time.
Right.
Sometimes they'll include that and also known as, previously, former known. But yeah, you see that all the time. Hey, Indian names are hard to pronounce. Much less spell.
Are we gonna do this again?